Hey everyone, welcome back to the Honest Pod. Today's fun because I get to have the famous, the amazing Mario Garcia with us today.
Hey,
Mario,
hey.
say hi to the people.
Hi, people. It's good
So
to be
for those
here.
of you, for those of you that don't know, Mario is my husband, has been for almost 19 years.
Hmm.
Can you believe it, babe? We've made
That's
it
crazy.
19 actual years.
Wild
Um,
and crazy.
I know. And throughout those, I just thought it would be so great to have you come on because this month we're talking about what does it mean to live a life that is free and fully alive, per the
Yep.
fact that my book is coming out. And this has been a very crazy, wild, fun, stressful experience. We're like so excited about it. And then in the same breath, we're learning a lot of things. And
Yeah.
if anything, we're having to channel all of these tools that we've learned in this book to be able to keep us grounded and not lose it because there's
Hmm.
just so much when a book is coming out. Who knew?
Yes.
Who knew?
Yep.
Well, now we do know. But I wanted to be able to have you come on because honestly, I feel like we wrote this book together. Like this is something that we have experienced. The free and fully alive life that we've experienced has been hard fought. And
Yes.
so many of the words that are on this page are literally words we wrote together. And I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but for all of you, I'm going to read the dedication because
Oh, jeez.
really,
There you go.
because I want all of you to know when I tell you that Mario is on here because he helped me write this book, it truly is like the pages of all of this healing have been written on my heart because of God and Mario. So it says, to my husband Mario, it was you who lovingly walked me through countless sleepless nights, held my tears when I had no words, and never stopped believing that healing was for me. My soul has found peace because of your persistent pursuit of my wandering heart. And through that, I met a piece of Jesus that had felt far away until his love through you showed me a new
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
Dedicated to you, sweet baby boy, baby babe.
Yes. Thank you.
Uh, yeah.
Ooh.
And I'm curious as I read that, what comes up for you in just hearing some of that?
Oh. What comes up? So much comes up actually, and um, I think it's for me it's the sleepless nights, and I know we joke about that. The
Mm,
3 a.m., the 4 a.m.s, but really, I think those are the moments where I realized that this work was important to you and it was important to us. And those are things like literally when people ask you like what keeps you up at night, like it could be good, it could be bad. But it was good and it was hard. And so for me,
mhm.
just looking at all this, man, like that's when I think our true selves kind of come out and emotions. And so I really had to press through some of those moments to actually stay engaged, and the things that we were talking about weren't light. And so, um, it just, I feel like it's like ride or die. Like, I'm so proud of you and for writing this and putting all these things on paper. It's one thing to live it and teach it, but putting it on paper to help others understand this work and what it can do for you is just, it's very vulnerable. As I know you've kind of wrestled with me sometimes too, is like it's printed now. It's out there for people to read. This is your heart. This is our heart. And so yeah, that's what kind of stands out to me. But I'm just so
Mhm.
proud of you. And yes, we're going through a lot right now trying to launch this book, and you know, tensions are there, but I love you and I'm really proud of you. It's been a
Thanks,
long
babe.
time.
Yeah. I wanna ask you, we'll dive into some of the because I am curious. I know this work has it's not just something you're proud of me doing, like you've actually
Mm.
done the work in these pages. you
Hmm.
have done. You have
Yes.
engaged them. This book is very formulaic. It's very like, here's what we've got to do first. Here's what we've got to do second. And you have done all of those things. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But I want to just share, because I think it's important for us to understand that out of the particularities of our pain really comes the particularities of our calling. I say this quite a bit.
Hmm.
And there was a moment, and I know you're going to remember it. I actually reference it in the book, where it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in the shower
Hmm.
crying, and I came out of the shower and I was sitting on the edge of the tub, and you had come in. And I think it was in that moment that you were like, man, you're like, we need help here.
Hmm.
We need to be able to get some help. And I'm curious, in that moment, here I am, book is done. Like, there's been so many days and years and work that have come into what it means to have lived a free and fully alive life. And fully alive does not always mean it's just all good, right? It's
Yeah.
being awakened to all the things. And
Hmm.
I'm curious, from that moment, looking back on that moment, what was kind of running through your head at that time? Just, as you've been walking with me for years, panic attacks and
Hmm.
lots of sleepless nights, lots of wrestling with someone who struggles with depression,
Hmm.
meaning me. And that culmination in that moment, I'm curious what was kind of running through your mind at that time?
Oh, let's see, taking me back there. I mean, definitely like for me, it was like an awakening, and not just for, you know, how hard this was, or I realized that I have to be emotionally available and emotionally present in these moments. And I had really never understood what that even meant, or even how to do that. So for me, it was like an awakening of like, man, this work is too important for me to just not engage in it myself, um, to engage in it with you. And so for me, it was just this like, it hit me hard of like, I have to be in touch with these parts of my emotions that I can then support you. I can then begin to share my own thoughts and feelings for you. So it was a real awakening for me
Hmm.
in that moment. It was hard. It was really hard. There was lots of moments in my life when I would freeze, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think like I felt myself wanting to go there, and I just said, I can't freeze right now. I can't
Mm.
freeze. She needs me too much, and this is too important to just be frozen. So,
Mm. Wow. Yeah, freezing is kind of your go-to
hmm,
response when trauma happens, or,
yeah,
when panic and you're scared, like, you don't necessarily fight or flight, you really freeze.
yeah,
And it was in that moment that you decided, and I love what you're saying, because it wasn't like, I need to get Karrie help. That was
hmm,
part of it. But what I
yeah,
hear you saying is, I actually need to heal so that I can actually be present fully for my wife who's hurting, which is an
hmm,
interesting take, right? I think for a lot of men, it's like, okay, we need to get her help. Like, and there's parts of that was true.
yeah,
And I was getting help. There was stuff going on. That wasn't just
mm,
like all of a sudden I'm crying in the shower and you'd never seen this before and I'd never been in therapy. Like, this
yeah,
is the culmination of a lot of therapy and a lot of story work and the things that I've been doing. I mean, I hadn't been writing this book yet, but that was a culmination. So it wasn't necessarily like, from what I hear you saying, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we need to get her more help. What I hear you saying is that was a moment of revelation that my wife is doing this work, but in order for me to do this work with her, I'm going to have to connect and
hmm,
figure out the areas of me where I'm not free, where I'm not fully alive, because instead of being free, I freeze.
yeah, yep. And I
Hmm.
just remind me too. I just felt like, that it was almost like something like that. This was to a point where I couldn't fix it. Like I didn't even have like the words to
Hmm.
say, what do you say to somebody who's in that kind of state? I was kind of like lost for words, and I was like, this is not a fixable moment. This is a moment where I just have to be present and be with you in that moment. So yeah, there was a lot going on. And so
Mhm.
yeah, for men who want to jump to the fix, or hey, I have to fix this, she's my wife, but it's not always the answer. And
Right.
so there was a decision I had to make in that moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the dynamics of our marriage, especially like the first 10 years, was really when I would get upset or I would have, these low moments that weren't diagnosed yet. It was like avoid or freeze. Like you would freeze
Mm-hmm.
in that moment when I would get upset, and then that would cause you to really avoid. Like, okay, I'm just going to go work more or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I'll pay for whatever you need, but when in that moment, I remember early years, in that moment when I would be like, level 10 emotion,
Mm-hmm.
you would freeze and then you would opt to avoid. Do you have a sense as to why freezing and
Mm-hmm.
then avoiding was kind of your go-to response?
I mean, without getting into a lot of my stories, which I'm always open to
Sure.
share, I think for me, but what I thought was like in the moment as a husband and as a man, like, and this is something that I worked through early on in my, counseling with a therapist was like, I would go into this spiral, shame, like the shame spiral. Like I would be like,
Mhm,
oh man, I can't help her. And so
mhm,
that can't help in that moment, I'd be like, I'm a terrible husband, provider, like I can't take care of my wife. And so it would actually spiral me to a point where that's where I then would like avoid because it just
mhm,
was so shameful that it really pulled me away from you and even myself. Like I had no idea what to do. So um yeah, it was just a really weird cycle that I would fall into, that
mhm.
avoiding the shame and not having the answers, right? Like I felt like, oh man, I
Right.
don't have the answers and I care about this woman more than anything and I can't step in. And so because I didn't have the tools or I just didn't, or the things that you were saying, I was taking it personal.
Mhm.
Um and sometimes it wasn't a personal thing. It was your story, it was your mental, capacity. And so it was just
Right.
like in that moment, what am I to do? But
Mhm.
my go-to, I think, was always to avoid conflict, and that not even just conflict, but avoid that confrontation of emotion, let's call it that, because that's my story. And there was a lot
Mhm.
of moments in my young childhood and young adults where that happened. So it was very comfortable and very easy for me to fall into that.
Right. And that just leads me to in the book in Free and Fully Alive, it talks about kind of these three pillars. And, it's connection to self, connection to God, connection to others. And really, there's this kind of formula of moving us through and into this place of a fully alive life. As you
Mhm.
were reading the book and, looking into it, what kind of stood out to you the most of like, man, this was an area where I really needed to go?
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I mean, obviously, like all three are super important. But for me, like, first of all, hey, love it, love the cover. Um, for me, I was like, what? I asked myself, like, what am I needed? Which area speaks to me? And as I kind of went through it, all three of them, I've been around them for a while. I think for me, it was like this connection to self. And even
Mhm.
in the parentheses here, it says grieving the pain you've experienced. Um,
Mm.
First of all, I had no clue what it meant to even grieve.
Mhm.
Fortunately, as a child, I didn't have a lot of loss. Like, my grandparents were around until pretty recently, and so I didn't have a lot of death, like a lot of loss in that sense. Didn't really have a lot of loss or grieving that I needed to get done. So for me, I was like, I had to really explore that section. And so as I was kind of going through, um, part of this connection to self, connecting to yourself, is expressing like your needs and understanding and acknowledging what I need. And so I
Mm.
couldn't move in these places that I wanted to with you or with relationships with kids, coworkers, whatever, until I realized like I need to begin to acknowledge my needs and express them in
Mm.
all situations and not think that I am a needy person, because I think a lot of
Right.
guys feel like, oh, I don't want to be too needy. I don't want to be a burden.
Mm.
And so that's kind of like I think where I was heading. And so Um, this one line says, opening yourself up to identify your needs may feel risky. It leaves you open and vulnerable and exposes your heart, bringing the potential of being harmed or let down once again. And so when I
Mm,
read that, I was like, oh, I've experienced that. I've experienced the being harmed for expressing something, for expressing my need, expressing, you know, standing up for somebody or something was
mhm,
met
mhm,
with harm. And so, um, and when I think about what that means in the next line, but if you want to be free and fully alive, naming your needs is essential to your growth and healing. Just like
mm,
Jesus needed the Father constantly. And I was like, I mean, it just spoke to me because I'm like, man, even Jesus needed that connection, back to his Father.
mhm.
And like, but he needed to be understood what he was feeling, and he did all the time. So, um, yeah, that's kind of what stuck out to me in the section
That's
that I
so
really,
good.
hmm
I think what's coming up for me is to ask you, so when you for all those years, you have told me, obviously, multiple stories,
hmm
around places where you did kind of step up and say what you needed or tried to protect
hmm
someone and based on what they needed, and like you said, it was met with harm. What begins to happen in a heart as you're reading that out of the chapter? What begins to happen in a human heart or even in your heart when you begin to deny and sever yourself from your needs? What
hmm
begins to happen and how does that affect your relationships?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really easy. That's, I think, where the foundation of avoiding came from. I mean, that's the core root of like my avoidance was I will never put myself in that situation again,
Mhm,
to feel that harm or to be expressed that way. So for me, it just really was a sense of, yeah, I need to just shut down, don't say anything, play it safe. Um, it's okay. Like it'll just kind of like kind of wither
work
away, or
itself
it'll just,
out or
yeah,
what,
work
yeah.
itself out. Time will heal it. I'm like, it was such a lie and I did such
Mm.
a disservice, not just to myself, but to those around me and in that situation all the
How do you
time.
feel like it was for me and you? How do you feel like that lacking of being able to name your needs in our
hmm
marriage, how did that manifest itself and create,
hmm
dysfunction or hurt? Like,
Yeah.
how did you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah. Well, I didn't really see it playing out until one day, one drive. And I know you know this moment where I was like, hey, what,
It's an awesome
what
moment, guys. Get
It's
ready.
an awesome moment, and I feel sometimes I'm like I feel so ashamed to share because I'm like I should know what this word means, but I really didn't know what it meant at the core of our relationship. But I was like, "Hey, babe, like, what is it? What does it mean to be resentful? What does resent mean?" And I was like,
Mhm.
and then we talked about it and processed it, and I was like, it just came out of my mouth. I was like, "Well, I think I resent you," and then you were like, taken back. And I was like, oh no, what happened? So then I was like, retreat, 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 and
Uh-huh.
spiral. But, it had to come out. I had to say
Right.
that. And I believe that was
Mhm.
like the Holy Spirit kind of just saying, hey, you need to get this out. You need to express, even if I didn't know exactly what it meant, I was feeling it. And so
Right.
after that moment, I was like, we had lots of good conversations, and I had to then do the work to get into what that meant. And I believe that resentment came about because of my
Mhm.
avoidance of conflict or you know
Mhm.
disagreements or just
Mhm.
expressing what I really want. I just held it in. I was like,
Mhm.
well, it's okay, I'll just take the brunt of everything
Mhm.
and not speak up for what I feel is right or what has even hurt me, like the words that you or others have said to me. um
Mhm.
so it really built up a lot of resentment,
Yeah.
not just for you but for all my life.
Right. And really this sense of anger. And I think when we're talking
hmm
about living a fully alive life is to understand that all parts of you are meant to be felt, experienced, and God invited into. And
Mm-hmm.
when you begin to go, well, I'm not going to have needs, I'm going to avoid something, a part of you has to be severed, right? A part of you
Mm-hmm.
has to be severed so that, like, I don't feel this. I'm not going to experience this so that I can, quote unquote, keep the peace. But the
Yeah.
problem was that our intimacy, our togetherness, our closeness, you weren't coming fully alive because a part of you was severed. And I was
Yeah.
kind of the opposite. I was so overly needy. And that showed itself in such
Mm-hmm.
rage and anger. Because for me, rage and anger was where I was able to get attention. But I had to sever the part of me that really needed tender care. Like that
Mm.
really needed tender care. So I was not living fully alive. I was living
Yeah.
severed. You were living severed. And I would venture to say that most of us, if we are not in touch with, what we're needing and naming what we're needing and also understanding why we do what we do, then we are living severed. We are living a
Mm-hmm.
life that is through the grid of how we were shaped and the harm that has
Mm-hmm.
come to us, rather than living through the grid in which God created us to be, the hands that formed us, the destiny that's on our bones, the fully
Yeah.
alive, abundant life. And I think often, like, when people, and would be a question that I would ask you, when people think of living a fully alive life, like free and
Mm-hmm.
fully alive, I think there's this tendency to think that it's going to be, there's no pain, there's no sorrow. It's all good. I never am scared anymore. It's going to all just be awesome. And for reading the book and knowing the journey, because you've really done this whole book, like I said, it's like we wrote this together.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you define for you
Mm.
now living? What does it mean to live fully alive for you?
Yeah. It's a great question. Um, it's a big question too. But
Sure.
I can honestly say that I am more in touch and I understand what that means a whole lot more today
Hmm.
than I did even 3 years ago. Like it's such a such a long journey. But for me, this idea of living fully alive, I had no idea what. If you would ask me that like 2, 3 years ago, like I would have said like I don't know what it means to. It would have been like I
Mm.
just live. I just be, just like exist,
Let it
and
come
that
as it comes. Just
let
whatever
it come as it
happens, whatever
comes,
happens.
don't take risks, just kind of
Mm.
live. And that was kind of my story, was just like live this very safe and calm life. And that served me for a long time. And it was for moments, and there were good moments, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I think through my journey now, looking at where I am, this idea of being fully alive is actually like it's it has reminded me. Now I can see who I was created to be. To be honest with you,
Mm.
there was a moment in all the work that I've done, the story work, all around all my stories, sitting with you, sitting with other men. Like I realized the importance of like, man, I was finally able to see the younger me that I believe had all these great qualities of life, like fully alive as a young boy, like sports, BMX, all these things. And it wasn't just about what I was doing, but it was like how I treated people, how I saw
Mm.
people, how I saw women, how I saw friends. Always there for the underdog type thing. So for me, it was like tapping into what that was, and now living that out in my life now, and being more confident in being able to share my needs and
Mhm.
get to those places of really doing things that make me come alive. um,
Mhm.
so I
Yeah,
don't
and
know if you want to get specific.
I mean, there's a portion in the books that's
Mhm.
like a callback to you, like
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying, this reclaiming who you were. And what would you say, like, this connection to self you
Mm.
kind of bring up, but what has been like the conduit for that connection that has allowed that person that God created you to be to kind of come to the surface? What has been the medicine, if you will, or the thing that you had to engage in to help
Mhm.
you be able to rescue? the little
Yeah.
one that was very trapped in, being the nice guy and just kind of
Yeah.
people pleasing and just avoiding, so that you really could come alive.
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of kind of, and I love this chapter, like a call to home, a call to you, like
Mhm.
releasing the old, stepping into the new, because it takes me back to when we were in LA and I had my first time ever of solitude by myself. And
Mm.
I'd gone, I don't know if you remember, I went with like a bunch of
Yeah.
questions for God to kind of help answer and what was next, blah, blah. And literally, it was the most beautiful time because he took me back to the prodigal son. And I was like, man,
Mhm.
I know this story. We know this story. But there was something about that day that he was just saying, I just want you back. I want you in my presence. I want to be in your presence. And so it was a very tender moment. And it was, I mean, you remember I came home like super emotional. I was like,
Mhm.
I don't know what happened, but it was like a story that I know very well, but it had a different meaning. So that's kind of where my journey began. And so I love that this chapter, this, I think that's why it spoke to me. But for
Mm.
years I tried to do all the things. I tried to engage in prayer, and that was great, and but it never really released me from like this, like that the hold that something had on me. I didn't even know what it was. So the
Yeah.
prayer, I did like deliverance ministry, I did Bible studies, and they were all good, and it was part of my journey. But it wasn't until I really engaged my story that I began to go, there was pain there that I have to grieve, and then that there was permission for
Yes.
me to actually step out and heal those places. I had no idea
Mm.
what that even meant. But for me, it was like it says here in this chapter, you will never be able to think yourself right. You will never
Mm.
be able to redeem your own story. You need supernatural invention, which I believe that's where God kind of started on the day of solitude with me, along with a willingness to get honest with yourself, God, and others. And I don't think I was honest with myself for
Mhm.
a long time. And so the connection to self obviously comes back to this moment too. And I'm like, I don't know if I've ever been honest. I just felt like I had this perfect childhood, and I had a great childhood, but there were
Mhm.
places that needed God's tending to.
Yeah.
But he needed me to see it first in my own story, in my own life.
And that's the thing, right? Like, there are good moments that
Hmm.
for some of us don't have good moments, but there are good moments in our childhood. But we live in a fallen world and we live with fallen parents. Like, they're not
Hmm.
perfect parents. No, there is no
Yeah.
perfect parent. And their wounded areas or the things in your environment, they do affect you. And I think one of the things that has been probably the most, touching for me is to watch you with real courage
Hmm.
grieve the places of your childhood that you just
Hmm.
kind of were like, well, that doesn't really affect me. It's fine, whatever. And yet, being faced with the work in this book of really connecting to self, God, and others, and really seeing where the enemy began a narrative of really taking you
Hmm.
away from who God created you to be and beginning to malign it and deform it and create like, weakness around it. To watch you grieve that and, you know, for the first time in, 19 years of being married, the last 5 years, have you been going, okay, instead of avoiding this or freezing in it, I'm going to sit in it and I'm going to
Hmm.
grieve it. And that is so much of what we talk about in the book because I'm like, grief is it's like the greatest gift we've been given, but we don't want to do it because we think we're going to drown. We think if we grieve
Yeah.
and engage grief, we're going to drown. Could you speak a little bit to that concept around grief?
Yeah, I think, for me, it was like I said, I was very unfamiliar with grieving and what that even meant, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
But I think after doing a lot of this work, there was a specific story work weekend that I did, and then a message. Obviously, God was speaking so kindly, right after that moment. But I heard one of our pastors describe when he said these words. I don't know what he was even speaking to, but it was like God like giving me language and words to describe what had happened after
Mm.
that weekend. But it was basically like it was God's goodness saturating every fiber of my being, um, and it kind of like it felt like a flushing. of like
Mm.
all the stories and all of that particular story of all the things that I was holding on to, you know, the avoiding or the resentment and the fear, a lot of fear. So it just felt
Mhm.
like that his goodness was just that saturation in my body and in my heart, mind, soul, all that. It just that was the best way I could describe what
Mm.
I was experiencing. And so it was a very, it was a supernatural experience. And I was like, that's what it was. And so, um, yeah, I just,
Well, like what you just said, like when you read
mm,
that, like you're not going to be able to think yourself right. I mean, you are a task oriented
mm,
person. If you are given a task or a job, it's like, okay, I'm just going to get it done. And then I want the result to be equal to the amount of work that I just put in. And this, from what I hear you saying is like you have to show up for the work. You have to show up
hmm,
for the work, but it's
yeah,
that supernatural. I love that word, like the flushing. Grief is
yeah,
the ability to flush. And we say in Free and Fully Alive, it helps where it has been stuck in your body, like embedded
hmm,
trauma
yeah,
and like stuck stories.
mm,
Grief is like it's like the oil that goes through your body and allows things to move through rather than staying stuck. And that's what
yes,
I have seen, and that's what we talk about in the book. And as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'm curious for you. This book, Free and Fully Alive, is definitely about this journey for yourself. It's the
hmm,
healing for yourself, but
yeah,
we've never been called to do this work just so it stays with us.
yeah,
And I kind of allude to that at the end of the book, but a lot of the book is a lot about how do we heal so that we can show up
hmm,
more healed in the spaces that God has given to us. And I guess just
yeah.
as we're kind of closing, how has this work, how do you feel like this work has benefited? I'm not going to tell you which area, but
Yeah.
you have kids, you have work, you have, your relationship with me. Like, how do you see this work benefiting the places where you care about the most?
Yeah, and it's funny because I was gonna like jump to this and like, hey, because I wanted to read this part, and but it actually relates to what I'm gonna share and what you had asked. It says, right after it says, getting honest to connect with yourself, God, and others, it says, then your painful stories will no longer have power over you. You will have power over them. You will be able to see God's plan for you more clearly. And
Mm,
that kind of sums up, I think, the totality of what I have stepped into. There's examples in every part of my life as a husband. I think for me, being a husband and expressing my needs has been huge for me, and that
mhm.
no longer I have fear of conflict. I don't fear conflict of like harm or even just like not harm, just like physically harm, but I'm talking like even like words back that would be hurtful or
Right.
whatever. So for me, like
Emotional harm, right?
yes, so in our relationship, it's been like expressing my needs and understanding that hey, I can express this to you without having to worry about the rebuttal. So that has actually
Mhm.
allowed me to kind of step up in that area. For my kids, it's been very helpful in terms of how do I connect to their heart and actually ask
Mm,
better questions before I actually accuse them or just lose my mind because it's something that I've had been frustrated about forever. But I think for me personally, it has really allowed me to step into these places where I think God is like asking me to minister to men and guys around this because I feel
mm,
like this work is too important to keep to myself. And I think you're right. Like for me, it's like, and since I've been able to do that and step into these small places of doing story work or storyline with other men and going through possibly this book when they can get their hands on it, but um, it actually bring it. I always tell the guys this. I'm like, when I walk away from a conversation, like I am filled. Like
mm.
I am fulfilled and I don't walk away drained. I feel like it's life-giving to me. It really is. So anytime I'm with guys or with you and we can talk about this stuff, it's actually life-giving to me. And so because of that, that life-giving portion of it, I am able to then, you know, enjoy what I do for like work, like as a creative director, as a designer, senior designer, whatever it is. I'm like, I have some place to actually put energy that I know brings me life. Not that graphic design, grid direction doesn't bring me life, but it just enhanced who I was as a whole, from father to husband to, you know, graphic designer, whatever.
Mhm.
So it's been really awesome. It's so exciting for me.
I mean, it really, I mean, I'm saying this honestly to all of you guys that are listening. My husband is a different person
Yeah.
than who I married. And there was really great things about who I married and wonderful and kind and good. But to watch you come alive, like
Hmm.
when this book says free and fully alive,
Yeah.
whenever I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if this works, like you just get in your head about stuff, all I have to do is just take a look at you and
Mm.
see. I mean, even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have asked you, Mario, what are you passionate about? And you've been like, I don't know.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
this has allowed like passion and a fire and an energy and a purpose rise up. And I love what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes me a better graphic designer and a better dad. But the thing is it's never been what I've seen is it's not about that you've become a better graphic designer. What you
Yeah.
have done is
Hmm.
shown up in that space so much more grounded and confident in who you are. And confidence is
Yes.
attractive. And it's allowed you to hold space for other people's hearts even
Yeah.
in with some of your clients and to be able to talk
Yeah.
with them and anybody that
Hmm.
comes across your path. And it's really been amazing. And I love what you said that people, obviously women predominantly read books, women predominantly would kind of
Hmm.
come to our freedom academies and whatever.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you've become very passionate about is getting this message, this free and fully alive message, into the hands of men.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Hmm. um, well, I'm going to say this, but I know it's not every guy, every man, but I feel like from my story and what I've seen, the majority of the guys that I've sat with in the last couple of years, it's all around this idea of like claiming back our voice to
Mm,
not just like bring the hammer, put the hammer down or whatever. And like, it's like, how do you lead from a place of compassion? How do you lead from a place of empathy? And how do you lead from a place where you're expressing your needs and actually understanding the emotional side of who you are? And like, that doesn't mean you're always crying. It doesn't mean you're always like a wimp because you're expressing emotion. It's like, no, you got to understand, you have to at least understand what those emotions mean and where they're coming from so that you can actually then bring them to trusted spaces like a men's group that you go to or your spouse or, and then to understand your kids. So in
mm,
all aspects of life, even in your co-working space, like there's places where you can actually ask more questions because you're curious rather than try to fix. And so
mm.
it's just too important. And so I think what I love that this book is not just a two women book. It's
Right.
for humans. And so yeah, I would love for most men if they don't want to go into like something big like a big training 3-day intensive or whatever, like this is a great place to start because it actually gives you a foundation to help you understand. And if you don't understand it, can you bring it to somebody or write us and ask like, hey, what does this even mean? Or I've been
Hmm.
processing this. So yeah,
That's
does
so
that answer
good.
the
And
question?
yeah, it sure does. And I mean, it's so interesting, right, to talk about these things because you've gotten to the point now where you live it, eat it, breathe it. Like
Hmm.
this has so
Yeah.
become a part of your, even some of the words we say, like holding space. And, these are become a part of your
Hmm.
vernacular. It's just how you talk. But
Yeah.
it's not always been like that. And that's what I want, people to
Hmm.
understand and take away, that there is a path. And I think for
Hmm.
many of us, we know that there's an abundant life. We hear about it. We know that God wants us to be free. We don't really know what that means. We just are like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm not just supposed to feel sad. Maybe that's freedom. And
Yeah.
we hear about abundance and we
Hmm.
think,
Hmm.
maybe that's financially, or maybe that means that, me and my wife don't have any problems. Here's what I want to say. Mario and I have problems. Mario and I fight. Mario and I disagree. Mario and I love being together, and sometimes we don't. And the truth is that I've never felt more protected in my life. I've
Hmm.
never felt like someone has stood up to be kind, to say the hard things, to hold my heart when it needs to be held, but also say the things that I need to hear for the betterment of myself, where he would never have
Mm.
done that 10 years ago. He would have been too
Yeah.
afraid to do that, to cause waves, to challenge me. And so I become overly needy, and pushes me away more and more. We
Mm.
don't have that dynamic anymore. That
Yeah.
dynamic has now shifted. And, Mario's never going to be the totalitarian, ruler in my house. But what he has become is a confident protector. And
Hmm.
and that's what kindness is. Mario, when I met Mario, was a nice guy, but nice is passive. What
Mm.
Mario has turned into is, I believe, the guy that God always created him to be. And he has become kind. And kind
Hmm.
stands up in the face of oppression. It speaks truth in love. It
Hmm.
holds and bears one another. That's what kindness is. And it took
Yeah.
Mario doing this journey and watching you do this journey, babe, to get you
Hmm.
to a place where it wasn't about you just, embracing, or overcoming your story. It has
Yeah.
actually been about you embracing your story, embracing who God created you to be, stepping into that kindness. And I, for one, am a better human because of it. I'm more taken care of, and I have been able to heal because of your healing, and I think
Hmm.
vice versa. So I don't know if there's any other thoughts, but that's just the beauty of what this work has been in our marriage, and then personally in your life and in mine.
Yeah. I think I actually love when you said like the overcoming versus embracing it. And it just made me think like overcoming means like there's a finality, and there's like it feels like a lot of pressure. Like I have to overcome something. Like I gotta get over that mountain, or I gotta accomplish something fast now to the best of my ability, perfect. But
Mhm.
embracing is such more it's like it feels more inviting as opposed to like this pressure. There's like an
Mhm.
invitation back to anything. It's an invitation to slow down. It's an invitation to pause and look and reflect and process with trusted people. And so I would never even know what it means to like overcome something. I'd have been like, well, I just, it's a lot of pressure. I don't do well with pressure. So
Mhm.
what does that mean to people? It could mean something different to everybody, but I
Mhm.
love the idea of it. And that's what I've had to do is embrace it. And
Mhm.
because I'm embracing it, there are steps that I'm taking to overcome certain areas, but
Mhm.
I don't think this journey will ever end where I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm good. I don't need this anymore. It's an
Right.
ongoing. So
I love that. And
yeah,
I think the idea of overcoming, really, we are constantly in a state and being told that we need to overcome, and like
mm,
that overcoming means that we're denying the actual parts of our story that need to be embraced. And by
yeah,
overcoming, it moves us,
mm,
and we talk about this in the book, it moves us into this cycle of false freedom where we're trying to
yeah,
overcome, and we use other things, work, people pleasing, addictions, what Netflix and chill, whatever. Like we use
yeah,
all of these things to try to quote unquote overcome the pain of our story, when what God is saying is actually we want to embrace the pain, not so we just stay like fixated on the pain, but those painful
mm,
stories need care. And it's out
yeah,
of those painful stories where the particularities of our calling will begin to rise. So, yeah, I think
yeah,
the whole idea of overcoming, it's falsehood. It moves us into behavior modification, and away from heart transformation. When we embrace our
yeah,
story and invite God into that, we get to move into heart transformation. And that's really what this book is
mm,
about, is how do I
yes,
begin to reclaim by embracing my story and not getting on that cycled wheel of I got to overcome, so that I can
hmm
kill it for the kingdom. But how
and then
can I
just move
move
on to
into
something else.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. And how can I move into relationship with God and myself,
hmm
and then ultimately with others? Well,
hmm
Mario, I love you. I'm so
I love you too, babe.
thankful that you've been in this work with me. Thank you for
Yeah,
really, with every page that's been written, your hand has held my hand to write it. So, I feel like we're birthing a book. We wrote
yeah,
a book together, and we went first. We
yeah.
went first. And so for all of you guys that are kind of on the fence about, this book, I really encourage you, one, pre-order, because pre-order means a lot to me. And you also get some goodies with it. You get 2 videos where there's one video where I really break down freedom. What does freedom mean? And what does it mean to live fully alive? This is extra content that's not in the book. I also give you a podcast where I kind of pull back the veil and talk about the struggles for me in writing this, and also just some extra stories that I didn't put in the book for you to have. So when you pre-order, you do get that. So I'd love for you to pre-order, but I just want you to know I did not write this book from theory. I wrote this book, and Mario is all over the pages of this book. We wrote this. My heart was that we would go first. And both myself and, as you heard, Mario, we went first, and it works. Now, are we in process? Of course. But we are more free and fully alive than we would have ever been. Wouldn't you say,
Yes,
babe? More,
100%.
yes. Like we are awakened, and we know what to do when grief comes. We know what
Mm-hmm.
to do when we feel the heartache. We know what to do when other people have grief that come to us. We know what to do now because we've taken the pages that are written in Free and Fully Alive seriously. We have lived them. It is a product of our journey, offered to you to give you invitation to really the Holy Spirit and what he wants to do in your life. So I hope that
Yes.
you would grab this book and that you would pre-order, and that you would share with us what has it meant for you to engage some of these places and these pages of experiencing a life that is free and fully alive. Thank you so much, babe, for being on. I love you.
Thanks for having me. Love you too.